When I went to Monoprix yesterday, I noticed some signs that the seasons are changing. The remaining winter clothing was on sale. Spring clothing, made of linen and printed with flowers, was now in stock. The hair removal products had been moved to a more prominent place in the store, and there was a large display of sunscreens, every single kind of sunscreen. Sunscreen as a spray, as a lotion, and as a stick. All natural sunscreen and all chemical sunscreen. Sunscreen that keeps your face from getting shiny, and sunscreen that promises to be safe for sensitive skin. And every level of protection, from SPF 6 to SPF 100. I had trouble choosing which one I wanted, but I never questioned whether I should be buying sunscreen in the first place. We all know that we have to wear sunscreen whenever we go outside, and that we should reapply it every 2 hours. Even if we don't plan to spend much time outside, we should use a low level of SPF every single day, even when it's cloudy and even in the winter. By now, it's common knowledge that sunscreen is essential for our health. We need it to protect us from sunburn and skin cancer, and more superficially, we need it to keep our skin smooth and wrinkle-free. The sun is dangerous, and we are all too fragile to face it without protection. And yet, sunscreen prevents our skin from making vitamin D. Vitamin D is a hormone that promotes the absorption of calcium in the body. Vitamin D is necessary to grow and maintain strong bones. It also helps regulate cell growth, and it plays a role in the functioning of our immune system. Most of us don't get enough of this vitamin, which is not good. People with low levels of vitamin D have significantly higher rates of almost every disease and disorder you could think of: cancer, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, depression, and more. Researchers have tested vitamin D supplements to see if they can improve health outcomes. It makes sense, right? If you take a pill that provides you with the missing ingredient, you don't need to expose your fragile skin to the sun. However, vitamin D supplementation has failed spectacularly in clinical trials. It seems to have no effect on rates of cancer, heart disease, or stroke. So what could we have gotten wrong? Well, there's another argument that's starting to gain traction in the scientific community. Maybe high vitamin D levels are not the cause of health. Maybe vitamin D is just an indicator that healthy people are getting plenty of exposure to the thing that is really responsible for their good health: the sun. A Scottish dermatologist named Richard Weller is one of the people espousing this theory. For a long time, he believed that sunlight was harmful, like the rest of us. Then, in 2010, he learned something interesting while he was studying nitric oxide. This is a molecule produced in the body that lowers blood pressure. Dr. Weller discovered a previously unknown biological pathway by which the skin uses sunlight to make nitric oxide. It was already well established that rates of high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, and overall mortality rise the farther you get from the equator, and they also rise during the darker months of the year. Dr. Weller put 2 and 2 together, and he had a eureka moment. Could exposing skin to sunlight lower blood pressure? Dr. Weller tested this theory by exposing volunteers to the equivalent of 30 minutes of summer sunlight without sunscreen. Their nitric oxide levels went up, and their blood pressure went down. Because of its connection to heart disease and strokes, blood pressure, or high blood pressure, is the leading cause of premature death and disease in the world. The reduction in blood pressure that Dr. Weller observed was large enough to prevent millions of deaths on a global level. But wait, wouldn't all those sun rays also raise the rates of skin cancer? Yes, but skin cancer, it turns out, doesn't kill as many people as you think. Less than 3 people for every 100,000 cases of skin cancer per year in the United States. For every person who dies of skin cancer, more than 100 die from cardiovascular diseases. People don't realize this because several different diseases are grouped together under the name skin cancer. The most common ones are almost never fatal. Melanoma is the deadly type of skin cancer, but it only accounts for 1 to 3% of all skin cancers. And strangely, people who work outside, like farmers and construction workers, have half the melanoma rate of people who work inside, like translators and interpreters. It seems to be the case that long-term sun exposure is associated with less melanoma. These are radical words in the dermatological community. Melanoma is dangerous, and it's usually caused by sun exposure. So shouldn't we be careful and stay out of the sun? Dr. Weller kept finding evidence that contradicted these long-standing beliefs. Some of the best evidence came from a Swedish researcher who tracked the sunbathing habits of almost 30,000 women in Sweden over 20 years. This Swedish researcher found that the women who spent more time in the sun had fewer blood clots and lower rates of diabetes. They did have a higher incidence of melanoma, but strangely, they were 8 times less likely to die from it. The Swedish researcher decided to look at overall mortality rates too, and the results were shocking. Over the 20 years of the study, the women who avoided the sun were twice as likely to die as the women who sunbathed whenever they could. There aren't many everyday chances that double your risk of dying. The Swedish researchers' team put their findings into perspective in 2016 with this statement. Avoidance of sun exposure is a risk factor of a similar magnitude as smoking in terms of life expectancy. This idea that wearing sunscreen might be as bad for you as smoking generated some buzz for sure, but it didn't change many minds. Some doctors found it dangerous. David Fisher, the head of the dermatology department at an American hospital, believes that the risks of skin cancer still outweigh the benefits of sun exposure. He says it is not worth it unless all other options for lowering blood pressure have been tried. Dr. Fisher recommends vitamin D pills as one approach that could be safer. Going back to our Scottish friend, Dr. Weller, he has recently finished his largest study yet, and it will be published later in 2019. For 3 years, his team tracked the blood pressure of 340,000 people in 2,000 different spots in the United States. They took into account variables such as age and skin type. The results clearly show that the reason people in sunnier places have lower blood pressure is a simple equation of light plus skin. This conclusion sounds counterintuitive, but in fact, it's completely intuitive. Humans have been running around outside for hundreds and thousands of years. It doesn't make sense for dermatologists to suddenly start telling us that if we go outside, we might die. And sunlight is not only good for lowering blood pressure, it reduces the risk of various cancers, as I mentioned before. It helps regulate sleep schedules. It reduces inflammation, and it improves virtually every mental condition you can think of. And it's free. These seem like benefits that everybody should be able to take advantage of. But not all people process sunlight the same way. And the current American sun exposure guidelines were written for, we have to admit it, the whitest people on Earth. In the beginning, all humans evolved outdoors beneath a tropical sun. Like air, water, and food, sunlight was one of our key inputs. Humans also evolved a way to protect our skin from receiving too much radiation in the form of melanin, a natural sunscreen. Our darker-skinned ancestors produced so much melanin that they never had to worry about the negative impact of the sun. As time went on, humans migrated farther from the tropics, and there they faced months of light shortages every winter. Some humans evolved to produce less melanin when the sun was weak. This enabled them to absorb all of the sunlight that was available. They also began producing more of a protein that stores vitamin D for later use in the body. In spring, as the sun got stronger, they would gradually become more tan and more resistant to radiation. Sunburn was probably very rare before modern times, but these days we spend most of our time indoors. So when a pale office worker takes a trip to the beach in the summer, he gets roasted. That's the perfect recipe for melanoma. A little known fact, or at least it was something I didn't know before, is that darker-skinned people rarely get melanoma. The rate is 26 per 100,000 Caucasians and just 1 per 100,000 African Americans. At the same time, African Americans suffer from high rates of diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and cancers, all diseases that seem to improve in the presence of sunlight. This suggests that maybe they are not getting enough sun exposure. Because of their genetically higher levels of melanin, African Americans require more sun exposure to produce vitamin D, and they are less able to store that vitamin for less sunny days. So darker-skinned people have much to gain from the sun and little to fear from it. And yet, they are being told a very different story. The cosmetics industry is now trying to push sunscreen at darker-skinned people. The dermatology community is trying to adapt their sunscreen products for this market. But this is just a marketing ploy. People with more melanin can get skin cancer. Nobody is denying that. But it is much less likely to be caused by sun exposure. Old beliefs don't die easily, and I can understand if you remain skeptical about the sun. However, some experts are starting to come around to the benefits of sunlight. The sunny country of Australia changed its position back in 2005. The organization Cancer Council Australia states that ultraviolet radiation from the sun has both beneficial and harmful effects on human health. A balance is required between excessive sun exposure, which increases the risk of skin cancer, and enough sun exposure to maintain adequate vitamin D levels. It should be noted that the benefits of sun exposure may extend beyond the production of vitamin D. Other possible beneficial effects of sun exposure include reduction in blood pressure, suppression of autoimmune disease, and improvements in mood. Ultimately, though, there's no one-size-fits-all recommendation for sun exposure. It depends on a person's age, their skin color, the season, and where they're located in the world. Sunburn should certainly be avoided. That's not debatable. We all know that. But consider trading your sunscreen for a shirt and a hat instead when you go to the beach. If you won't be outside for more than half an hour today, consider not wearing your usual SPF. It's time to step outside and see the light. Thank you.